Hi, I'm Laura.
Hey, I'm Stefan, and you're listening to Attributed, a podcast library by Dreamdata.
The purpose of it is to store and share all the knowledge that we have gathered across Dreamdata employees through our LinkedIn Lives, podcasts, and webinars.
The typical topics you'll find here can be stuff like marketing,
Sales,
B2B ads,
operations,
social selling maybe. Hello, everyone. With me today, we have a very esteemed guest, a man I've been stalking on social media for a couple of years now. Bill, maybe for those who don't know you and haven't been following you around social media for a couple of years, could you just kind of do the quick intro to yourself and what you do and have done in the past?
Sure, yeah. So first off, thanks for everybody for joining. I know this is very early or very late, depending on which part of the globe you're in. So either way, always appreciate people, taking a little bit of their day out to listen. My background, so I did about 10 years in B2C, did my own startup right out of college. We exited that, worked with a couple of very large media companies, had a couple exits there, and then went over to the B2B side. So came in with Salesforce, was their SVP of marketing. Went over to Zendesk as their CMO, took them through an IPO, and then also with Slack as their CMO/CRO, and then an eventual IPO as well. And now I do advisory/board work, and I'm really passionate about business. I've always been a business nerd. Sixth grade, I was reading Wall Street Journal and, Fortune and Forbes and Business Week, and I just love this stuff. So I was excited to chat today.
That's super. Yeah. And I think when you hear those names, Bill, it's like, how did he managed to get into these? You seemed also to get into those companies just at the right time as well, while they were still growing extremely fast. And what do you think that you've maybe that's different direction, but how did you decide employers while going through your career?
So a couple things. I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was, don't worry if you're employed or not, worry if you're employable. So always be building up your skills. I think especially within marketing, especially online marketing, there's always new techniques and skill sets, technology that you can leverage, and you really need to invest in that, stay on top of that. And then for myself, I have a really simple thesis. I look for pain. Where there's more pain, there's more opportunity. For Slack, I just thought, I've never met a single person that loved email and was like, oh my God, email works amazing. And it's so good for group collaboration. Lots of pain there. Zendesk, customer service, tons of pain. So I think there's always if you look for where there's basic pain, whether you're starting something up yourself or whether you're looking to join a company, I think that's super helpful. And then, I always tried to apply a little bit more of a modern go-to-market. I think a lot of companies, especially in the B2B space, I don't know what it is. It's very conservative, very let's just use the playbook we've been using for the last 30 years. Let's send out a press release. Let's do events. Let's do top-down selling. And again, nothing wrong with any of those in a channel, but there are just more modern ways to go to market now. And so I think, you kind of have to think about those, because no matter what space we're in, even Slack, there's 5 or 10 other companies that are doing it. These are always very crowded spaces. By definition, if you have success, a VC is going to see that and fund 4 other companies. So you have to really think about not only just, obsess on the product side, but obsess on the go-to-market side.
Just think it's a really important point for those marketers out there. Whenever you shift job, you make quite a big investment, because it's your life and the time you have available. And if you pick a bad horse, you can be the best of marketer, but if the product is not really good and not really solving any real pain, as you're saying, then it's really hard to become super successful, because the macro of the product not really solving a pain is going to be against you all the way through.
Yeah, I think it's important too to really think about what is your personal philosophy with marketing or go to market, right? There's a lot of different tactics you can use, from high velocity PLG to top down ABM to very customer centric to very sales centric to very present. Just make sure that you align with the company that you're going into, right? I had a lot of conversations with Slack, the board members, Stuart, just to make sure that, hey, we had they were open-minded as to building a more modern go-to-market engine and what that looked like from a customer-centric standpoint. So, I think all those things matter, right? And the metrics matter. I know we're going to be talking about that, but hey, does the board believe in the same metrics you do, right? That's important, right? These things are all really important.
Absolutely. And then I before today, I wrote a small request for you to kind of think about a marketing anecdote from each of those 3 very well-known companies that kind of maybe it was a tactic, something very tangible that kind of represented an inflection point at each of these companies. I don't know, did you give some thoughts to that, Bill? I love a good tactic myself, so I would love to hear, like, what was it at Slack that really worked, or
Yeah.
one thing that really worked?
Sure. Happy to go through that. So I'd say maybe we'll do Salesforce and Slack. So Salesforce was one of the first companies I'd been part of where we had a V2 mom, and that was basically just like, hey, what's our top priorities that we're going to focus on this year? And you would always have a couple of values like, hey, how are we going to, live this, this prioritization? And one of them was always like, hey, customer success. Like, we have to make sure our customers are successful. And I thought that was a different orientation than a lot of companies I had been around, where Mark was always harping on, customer centricity, customers first. And I thought like that really rallied it, right? Like, I started thinking about the brand not as your visual identity or your slogan, but the brand was the sum of all these little touch points that a customer interacted with you. And those are interactions on the sales team, the marketing team, the website, the support team, all these different interactions, right? But that definitely was a big ethos for me. I think when we went to Zendesk, oh yeah, go ahead there.
Oh yeah, I was just I was nodding, and I feel definitely when you're dealing with these more complex software suites, it's like the customer success team really doing everything they can to like treat customers well and onboard them, and roll out the activation of the product is just absolutely crucial.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would even argue, I think, and that's interesting because when I say customer success, I really meant like, individual customer having success with your company, right? And I do think the customer success team is a big part of that, but I would argue like, hey, that's everyone's responsibility, and everybody has that.
Yeah.
I think at Zendesk, one of the, ethos we had there was beautifully simple. And that was something, Mikkel had come from, I think he actually did like implementations for large support teams at these big companies before Zendesk. And he would go in and they literally would have like a 900-page manual on how to use this like old software and have to train these teams. And he was kind of like, it doesn't need to be like that. Couldn't we just make something beautifully simple, right? And that was a beautiful little ethos. And I think today in enterprise software, it's still, the software's too complex. The average net promoter score for B2B software companies is something like a -19. Like, that's bad. It's like a -100 to 100 scale. So it just shows you, like, even today, a lot of companies, they don't build beautifully simple software, right? And I think Slack, we really leaned in even more on this idea of, we want to make a pleasant, simple, working experience, right? And I think the pleasant is important too, right? Not just does your software have the functions, but are you actually like smiling when you use it? Are you laughing? Are you having fun? I remember we would spend time crafting kind of unique, funny notes and in the release notes. So if you ever read the Slack release notes, like in the mobile,
I did.
yeah, they're a little fun. There's some Easter eggs in there, right? When you log in, what is that? The message of the day that was just originally like Slack just took too long to load, right? And we didn't want to have a giant hourglass spinning, and we're like, well, let's make a message of the day. I think you have lots of opportunities to delight people when they're using the product, and I think marketing is a big part of that, right? Historically, these teams get very siloed. Product is on one side, and marketing's on another, and marketing only focuses on leads, metrics, right? Little tie in there. But to the point that you can pull in marketing and go, hey, marketers, like, you're really good at like, visuals and making fun and simplifying things. Can you focus on those things too? Then all of a sudden your product is very different and unique. And people are having this great experience now. And what I've noticed as a marketer is, even if your metric is leads, if people have like a great experience with your product, they tend to talk about it. And they tend to recommend it. And all of a sudden you have this organic word of mouth leads coming in, which any good B2B marketer knows that is your best converting source of leads, right? They always convert the best, a good word of mouth lead coming in. So anyway, those are little tidbits from those three companies and how I tended to think about them.
It's super interesting, Bill. And it's funny, like, it's these small, you can take moments with products or companies that you remember. I remember Slack also, I think they refunded money when you had users that were not using the product. And that feeling it gave about Slack is that it was like super transparent, super honest. They will give you money back if you're not using the product. Like, you can really trust that company. And I did read those release notes. If you like, when you see an app is released, it's always super boring, or just like, we fixed some mistakes. And the Slack was always super elaborate with small, good stories in there for the user.
Yeah. The pricing and packaging was a really interesting one, because we definitely spent a lot of time thinking about that. On, we did have a freemium plan, which I'm a big fan of, but on our paid plan, we didn't tie the metric to you paid and you just were stuck with it. It was, hey, if you were starting to use Slack and, you had 10 people on your team using it and 3 people stopped using it, or maybe one person just went on vacation. That was actually like the most common. I think at the time we had like a 10-day window. And so a lot of times people, especially in Europe, go Europe. I love that you can take multi-week vacations. They would get notes. We'd send notes to the admin going, oh, Sherry is no longer using Slack. Here's a refund or credit back. But anyway, the idea there was the success metric, though, was if they were logging into the platform every day. And if they didn't, we didn't get paid, right? So that's a very different dynamic. Like now everyone at Slack, all the employees are like, we got to make sure people get value. We got to make sure they're going back and using the platform. Otherwise, we don't get paid. And I think that's a really good example of aligning a business metric within your company to the customer success metric, right? And when both align, you're both incentivized to create great outcomes.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And just one more Easter egg before we head into the metrics, which actually I want to talk about. If you search for a Zendesk alternative, I don't know if you were around when they created that fake rock band, Bill.
I was, yes.
People who are in a competitive industry where competitors are biting your ankles, then go search for Zendesk alternatives. And you'd actually find a rock band that has recorded a video and all sorts of crazy stuff. It must have been quite fun to pull off.
Yeah, that was, we had an amazing video team at Zendesk, and it allowed us to do a lot of fun things. And one of the ideas is my history, I was talking about when I'm in the B2C side, I spent a lot of time in SEO. So I knew that really well. And, a very common search is your name plus alternative, because people are just kind of like, oh, what other companies are in the space? I'm in my research stage. So we were like, what if we made this fictitious band, that was part of, also named Zendesk. And, they talked about how Zendesk stole their name, and it's just like 5 minutes. And it's just funny, right? It's a fun way for people to get introduced to the band. And it's still kind of ranks, which is crazy. It was like 10 years later or something like that. So
I still anecdoted, maybe told it to 40, 50 people. And it's funny how these small brand moments really can stick with you.
Yeah, it was fun.
Okay, if we then switch over to the hardcore
let's do it
stuff. So Bill, you've been running marketing teams at some of the most successful companies, or software companies at least. I guess metrics is a natural big part of that. How do you think about metrics in general for marketers and marketing leaders? What is kind of your the overarching point of view of metrics before we start heading into the more specific?
Great question. Yeah, great question. So I'm an optimist. My dad once told me the story where he's like, hey, if you have your wallet and you drop it on the sidewalk, 90% of the people will give it back with the money. 7% of people will give it back, but maybe, take the money out, and 3% of people will just take it.
Yeah.
But the basic point is 90% of the people, the vast, vast, vast majority of people are good and want to do the right thing. And I always kind of thought it's the same in our work and our careers. Hey, most people are just good. They want to do their job well. They want to feed their families. They want to, make money so they can get a house or whatever it is. Right. And the metrics we choose as a company, both at a company level, at a team level, at an individual level, are huge incentivizers for those people and will really dramatically alter what they focus on a day-to-day level, right? And it's not that, sometimes it's maybe you had a bad experience with a salesperson, right? At one point, I think we all have a good experience. So people have all had a bad experience. Well, a lot of times, what was their metric that they literally got their paycheck from, right? Did they just choose something maybe it was that first sale and that was it? They get 100% credit if they got the sale. They have no other metrics at all. Well, of course, you're kind of incentivizing a behavior, think traditional car salesman. They don't care if you come back. They know that you wouldn't be back for another 5 or 10 years. So they just would do anything they can to get that one sale there, that one time. But that was the metric that drove a lot of that behavior. So I think my overarching philosophy is just, you have to be really, really careful about thinking about the metrics you use. What behavior is that incentivizing? And then maybe B, you even have to think about hey, is this a team-based metric? Is this a individual metric? What are you incentivizing there? Are you incentivizing silos, or are you incentivizing collaboration across different teams that might normally work together? So that's how I try to frame it in my head.
And kind of have you had like one metric for the marketing team where everybody had to support that metric, or have you been going out handing out different metrics to different people, or how have you typically orchestrated that part?
So I think you have to look at it, right? Like in an individual level, at a marketing team level, and then even at a company level, right? And
Mm.
so for marketing, if you want to get into it, like there are kind of a couple different broad categories that I look into. And even before I go there, let me take a step back. Like I get that for those listening, watching
Yeah.
LinkedIn Live, 95% of B2B companies, like marketing's metric is leads. And I actually think that's kind of sad in a way. Like I say sad because I think marketing is much more than that.
Mm.
Marketing can have a really impactful cause and effect on just your overall company's growth, your revenue. And when you just take it down to leads, it's a very short area. It's a very narrow area, right? So really the 4 or 5 categories I like to think about are, first starting off with, I call them funnel metrics.
One more time.
Funnel metrics.
Funnel.
Funnel metrics, right? Funnel metrics is this broad set, which is everything that includes like top of funnel. Hey, how many visitors are we getting, every day, every month to the website? How many leads, how many MQLs, how many, SQLs, SALs, pipeline, ARR, for instance. It's just all these kind of financial metrics, right? And you have to think really strategically, like, where do you put that, right? Is that at the beginning of the funnel? Is it at the end of the funnel? A lot of times marketers will go for leads. I would argue, even if you're going to go leads, you should have a marketing qualified lead. There's a lot of weird things marketers do when they just have to get someone to fill out a form and they get their bonus, right? You think when you go to a site that where everything is gated, you can almost guarantee like that site like had leads as a metric and that was it. But the funnel metrics, I'd argue when you go further down the funnel, you become more of a partner with sales versus more of an adversary with sales, right?
Mm.
Because you're both only getting paid or, metric if, someone actually comes a true opportunity or someone actually did become pipeline or they actually did sell it there, right? But I do think the funnel metrics are important. And not only within funnel metrics, classifying out, are these new revenue or is this, add-on upgrade expansion revenue, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of marketers will only do leads, but they'll only do leads for net new people coming in. And I would argue, especially in like software SaaS, the field we're both in, historically, half your revenue will come from add-on upgrade expansion, different plans, new products.
Yeah.
Like marketers can do a huge job there. And when they don't, what ends up happening is sales ends up having to do all that, all through one-on-one knife fights. Marketing is really good at doing, programs at scale, right? So we can really help improve with that capital efficiency, which is really important if you're thinking about it. But those are the funnel metrics. That's the first category that I tend to think about.
Yeah, I think this is kind of what you need kind of when rougher time comes. You need to be able to show, look, this is the input we're giving to the overall revenue of or like the new business sales. We touch X amount of leads, and like hence, if you fire us or cut our budget with 50%, we will. People will be in trouble. I can imagine like the challenges of coming. So now we're moving over to 3 other buckets of metrics. And how do you, like, you've probably been in this situation before where you need to steer the board, you need to steer the CEO, the CFO to respect that there's actually other metrics that we can measure than leads here. How have you typically approached that conversation, that there's more to life than just the amount of leads that we get through?
Yeah, I've found personally for, the marketing folks listening or marketing leaders is that a huge part of your job, I would argue 25, 30, 35% needs to be spent on communication and education of the company on what the heck marketing does, what the heck marketing is, right? What's your role? What's your impact? Like even that example of, hey, I think marketing can make an impact on creating more revenue from our existing customers. A lot of people just don't know, oh, wow, you could do that. Like I've never been a part of a company where marketing helps with that, right?
Yeah.
Or we'll talk about this later with experience metrics, but hey, well, marketing can help improve our net promoter score. Oh, that's interesting, right? Like I always thought that was just customer success or the support team that did that. And even probably my next category, brand, which I'll talk about is, hey, what is brand? A lot of people think like, oh, brand, like it's just this amorphous marketing. You're just going to go waste money. You're going to waste, like, you want $5 million to just, flush it down the toilet. Well, here's the thing, brand, you can measure brand. There's tons of good metrics on brand. There's, aided recall, unaided recall, sentiment, sure voice, sure conversation, especially I think, brand isn't as muchly paid attention to in the B2B side. I would argue that's a big miss, but for those of you that have worked on the B2C side, it's absolutely tracked, religiously looked at, right? I do think you need to have these conversations with your stakeholders. That's a big thing, like marketing, like CFO, CEO, head of sales, head of success, head of support, and then all of your board members. Maybe there's 4 or 5 board members. You need to have relationships with them, talk with them, and explain to them, hey, this is why I think marketing, this is what we should be looked at. This is the areas I think we can positively impact. And brand, I always said, well, look, guys, like demand gen is short-term leads, brand is long-term leads, right? Like it's still the same goal. Like, hey, we want to improve the business, but brand is something that is going to allow us to differentiate. It's going to allow us to, make people smile. They're going to buy more. They're going to recommend more. But hey, we're going to track it. We're going to track it through one of those 5 metrics I mentioned, and there's different ways you can track it. Like at Slack, we did a really simple email survey that just asked people, hey, when you think of team communication software, which companies come to your head? That's unaided, or you can give them the answers, Slack, HipChat, that's aided, right? And then you just track it. You run it every month, every quarter, and you have a metric behind it.
But it's interesting. You say like up to like 20% of how much did you say you should spend on just coordinating with the rest of the org? Now, why you're
30%. The biggest mistake, because I do a lot of advisory roles now where I work with companies and a lot of times with the CMO or the VP of marketing. And the biggest mistake I'll see is a lot of people come from an IC path, they get promoted up. And when they're in that role, all they do is heads down 100%.
Yeah, they do tactics.
There's so much to do in marketing, right? There's just always things are on fire and we're trying to do this and this and this. And they never ever talk to all these other stakeholders and kind of inform them, hey, here's what we're putting our cycles on. Here's what marketing is. Here's how long things take, right? Like, a lot of people are guilty on the other side of going, oh, marketing, just change the website, with the new messaging. That should take a day. And they're like, no, that's not how it works, right? You have to educate people. Here's the timeline, right? And you got to understand too, a lot of people in SaaS or software, a lot of those founders are product founders, right? Or they have a development background, an engineering background. Like marketing is kind of new to them, right? It'd be the same, right? Like if, as a marketer, you're CEO tomorrow and all of a sudden you're managing, the dev team and the infrastructure team. And you're like, I have no idea kind of what your metrics are or what you do or your purpose. Like, you kind of rely on them to educate you. So I do think you need to spend those cycles on educating people about the metrics, about what you're doing to be more successful and get that buy-in.
Super good. So the first bucket, that's the funnel metrics. That's the hardcore kind of revenue related metrics. The next one you said is experience metrics.
Actually, I was going to go with, I'm going to go in order. I'll do brand metrics. Is the second one. So we talked about, aided recall, unaided recall, sentiment. But the important thing is just start tracking it, right? So the cool thing when you start tracking brand metrics is depending on your methodology, you will get not only your metric, but you'll get all your competitors' metrics. And I found, especially if you're trying to like, oh, nobody believes in brand, nobody will invest in brand. A great way to get more investment in brand is to show a chart, your next board meeting or your next, exec meeting or whatever meeting it is, and show yourself, your company plotted out with 5 data points on your awareness, and then show your competitors, right? Yeah. And maybe those competitors are growing higher, right? And be like, hey guys, we need to think about this, right? Or sentiment. Sentiment is just like, how favorable do you perceive this company, right? Yeah. Maybe not everybody knows you yet, and that's okay, you're getting there, but like everybody knew Outlook was the most favorable perception towards Outlook. I'd argue maybe not, right? So you do have to think about these things. And, the more you start tracking brand metrics, and then you can show the impact. Now, tracking them is important. Another thing that I found, go ahead.
So brand metrics. So I've personally not worked in a role where you could afford these like big brand surveys and like call people and ask and stuff like that. So for a bit smaller companies, do you any methods that you can recommend to kind of measure brand in that sense?
Yeah, so some people will literally do direct searches. That's probably the easiest one. Direct searches of your brand from the web, right? So how people are literally typing your company's name in Google. That's an easy one. You're right. Historically, brand and brand metrics were very expensive and hard to get. I would argue, just like anything, that's improved tremendously. So when I was at Slack, what we did is we used SurveyMonkey. and it cost us maybe a couple thousand per survey. I think maybe 3,000. And we would just send it out, 500 people, that were kind of in our demographic, firmographic range, and they would get a survey, and we get to statistical confidence and 500 completed surveys. And then we had those data points, right? And then we ran that I think we ran it every month, right? So you're talking 3 times and 36,000 for the year.
Yeah.
Okay. It's expensive. Is it like going to kill you? I wouldn't argue like in a larger, B2B, even a medium-sized B2B company. The point is like, you can get these things. They're not like that hard. And look, one of the reasons I love Dreamdata and just in general attribution just kind of tells you like, hey, is this stuff working or is it not, right? Yeah. And starting to track these metrics allows you to go into all these meetings and not get into this brand works, brand doesn't work, right? This philosophical, just, hey, here's just data. Let's take the politics out of this. Let's just look at the actual data itself. So I do think like tracking those brand metrics and then thinking about like how they, get assigned to the team. I think that's another layer, an important layer is not just, I don't like the idea of, okay, my marketing team, I just have like the brand team and that's all they do. And that's all they get metric on. Then there's like a demand gen team and they have their own funnel metric. I personally found what works better is you have all these different teams by functional area. And then you choose at the beginning of the year, like, hey, what are the most important things we're going to focus on, right? Because you could argue like a social team, is that brand? Well, I don't know. Social, you can do a lot of things to generate leads and funnel, right? But you can also generate brand. Like, is the designer, are they brand or are they, demand gen? Because they could work on a lot of these demand gen campaigns, right? So I don't like giving team names a metric, right? Like, I don't like having a demand gen team because that's all they do is demand gen, right? They should be, is the paid advertising team, and we can leverage paid advertising for brand campaigns. We can leverage them for demand gen campaigns. But that's another important nuance too, is once you have these metrics, thinking about how they get assigned to the individual teams.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So funnel metrics, brand metrics, experience metrics, stakeholder surveys, and data-driven milestones.
Yeah, you want to pour through those real quick?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, yeah. So let's go to experience metrics next. Experience metrics for me is this idea of kind of going back to the Salesforce, right? Like we want to make sure our customers are successful. How do you do that, right? And what I've found is in a lot of companies, there are no experience metrics. Hey, was the customer successful or not? There's just none, right? And maybe there's one, maybe the support team gets it, maybe the customer success team gets it. Experience metrics for me are things like Net Promoter Score, CSAT. These are things that are Net Promoter Score simply says like, hey, how likely to recommend Slack to a friend or colleague? And what you notice is if you're marketing and if you care about how many leads you get, well, again, you want to make sure a lot of people are recommending you, right? So all of a sudden you're like, that's how it really came from me. I'm like, well, I want to drive my funnel metrics, but whoa, like the experience is having a big influence here because if no one's having a good experience with our company, no one's recommending it, I have to buy all the leads. Like that's a really expensive way to grow. I want to like think about, hey, can we get more people just having a great experience with us? And so I think just tracking experience metrics, like a Net Promoter Score, maybe at a company level, for marketers, we did a lot of stuff of like, hey, if someone self-identified as a 9 or 10, as an advocate at Zendesk or Slack, we would have automatic rules, right? Like, hey, will you write a review for us on G2 Crowd? Will you speak at our next conference? Will you, introduce us to your procurement person? Yeah. Whatever it is, right? There's a whole playbook around it.
I've tried that like firsthand myself, and it works incredibly well. And I think it is an expression that, look, I paid you money, but I'm actually so happy with the money I paid you that I feel like I get more out of the money that I'm giving you. So there's some sort of goodwill saved up within me. And if you come and ask nicely, you can actually direct that goodwill to like a tangible outcome.
Totally. Right. So you have those experience metrics, like things we did at Slack, for instance, like when I was there, I was managing the sales team too. And we put in a CSAT survey. So we said, hey, after someone finished interacting, buying from a salesperson, we would send a survey and we go like, hey, Sally was your account executive. How helpful was she? 1 to 5, how responsive was she? How knowledgeable was she? How courteous was she? Whatever lenses you want to think about, like, how do we make sure we're incentivizing a good experience, not just a used car sales person? Did I get the sale type experience, right? And then, you can even go like with metrics drive behavior. Okay, well, maybe these set of experience metrics are also, a part of if this person gets promoted, if they get their bonus, how big their bonus is, right? we measured CSAT extensively on the support side too, not just, hey, did you answer the ticket, or how many tickets did you close in an hour, right? Which is usually like the churn and burn, which we get copy paste macros for everything. But hey, did someone actually rate you really high on like helping them solve it, and they solved it with, courtesy and empathy? Again, like these metrics drive the behavior everywhere within the organization. Even marketing, again, like if you're getting measured a little bit on maybe the website, like how fast it loads, right? I would argue that's a good experience metric, right? Or did they find what they're looking for on the website? Or did you just put everything behind a gate? Because again, your only metric was a funnel metric. Those experience metrics matter. And I do think, finding, even to the very first point, if you believe in that stuff, go to a company that believes in that ask the CEO, what's your net promoter score? If they don't even know what that is, like that's a bad sign, right? Like, thank you very much. I'm going to go on to the next one.
It's very interesting to hear how you kind of think more holistic about marketing and not just kind of that spend money, generate leads thought, or it is what you think, but it's much more effective if it's the customers that are doing your marketing for you. Like this holistic approach of happy customers talk to other people, and then we get more customers, we get more leads, and so forth.
Yeah, it's a great flywheel. So anyway, so that was the experience metrics. Kind of going to 4 and the last 2 here, stakeholder surveys. So I was really shaped. I remember there was a point where I was working for one of my consumer companies, and I remember my laptop wasn't working, and I went to the IT person, and the IT person was just eating a donut, doing like nothing. Sorry. I love IT people, but sorry, and he was just like looking at me like, oh, what's the matter? I'll get to that next week. And I'm like, no, like I need to use this, right? Like this is my daily thing. And I'm just like begging and pleading with him, like, please help me, right? Like, and I was always like, I never wanted that. Like when I was running a team, I never wanted our team to be like that to our other internal stakeholders, right? In marketing, you have a lot of stakeholders you're working with, you're working with sales very closely. You're working with product very closely. You're working with finance on projecting, your revenue and how many leads and funnel stuff you're going to be getting here. You have all these different, stakeholders. And so one of the things that we would do too is we would run a survey. So we would run a survey to all these stakeholders and we would ask them, hey, how much value did marketing create for you? How responsive was marketing? All these different lenses. Like, so product marketing is a really good example of a sub team that works with a lot of these different teams. We would ask them like, hey, maybe the marketing ops person, well, maybe you have internal marketing team members that are relying on you as an ops person, right? So again, run that survey, create more of an internal customer centricity, because then these folks, again, you're not just eating a donut, I'll do it whenever. It's the DMV for those that live in the US. It's something where they're, incentivized to do a good job. Because again, most people want to do a good job.
I think it's super interesting that you do this, and that kind of, as a marketer, so sometimes you can feel like the king of the world if something you did was super successful. Like, now we're ranking number 1 on this big term, or we did this conference and we got this many leads. But what if the rest of the organization actually feels you're doing a bad job? Are you just running your own silo projects where like the rest of the organization is not impressed with your work? Well, you need to know so you can have the conversation and try to improve the collaboration. So super interesting, Bill. I've never heard anybody talk about that before.
Yeah. And I would say too, again, advising a lot of marketing teams and seeing marketing teams and seeing people and marketing teams get laid off, like it's a really dangerous situation when you're in marketing and you're just like, oh, we created this latest bell and whistle and shiny object. We're great, pat ourselves in the back. You want to make sure everyone else also believes what you're doing and that you're adding value. And those stakeholder surveys are a really good way. Now, does it have to be everything? No, you can weight all these metrics, right? But I think having something there is really important, right? Like if you're in product marketing and you're the person that does sales enablement for the sales team, you're working on customer stories, you're working on whatever. Well, they're the ones that they are the receiver of your product, right? You got to make sure that they think, that they think you're adding value and that you have a really good relationship there. And that's going to help you out. So you don't run into a situation where it's all of a sudden like, whoa, nobody thinks marketing is doing a good job. And and then that's hard, right? Because, budgets are tight. Well, who gets cut first? Maybe marketing, or maybe their budget gets cut, right? Whereas I think if you have stakeholder surveys and all these teams are like, oh, wow, they're crushing it. They're doing so good. Yeah, give them more. I'll give them my head count, right? Yeah. Because I think they're doing so good there. So it's a powerful metric to incentivize good behavior there.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think it's also, you shouldn't shy away from the bad news. If there's actually somebody who feel you're doing a bad job, then Like you need to like understand why they feel like you've been doing a bad job, or can you adjust the course and then make them happy again?
Yeah,
Then
yeah.
you're probably putting your company in a better position.
So the last two are one, the data-driven milestones is a big one. I think just, and that's just the reality is a lot of times in marketing, you're working on a big launch, a big release. You're working on a Dreamforce that's coming up, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a date driven. And I remember Mark Benioff, I remember he used to say like he liked date driven stuff because you put a flag in the ground and you couldn't really make excuses. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
we've booked Moscone on these dates. We have to have everything ready for it versus, agile sprints and, we can always do it in our next sprints and whatever it is. So I think sometimes those are helpful, right? In it, those date driven milestones. And then the last one, which I can't remember if we talked about, POG metrics, just real quick. I do, again, think in the mandate of where marketing can do product-led growth, there are things like daily active users, things like product qualified leads, right? This idea of like not just going through a traditional funnel, but going into the product and then becoming a lead that way. That marketing can influence and can improve. Now, is that a only marketing owns that? No. I like a lot of these metrics should be shared across multiple teams so you don't get these silos, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
PQLs, right? Like it's a great one that marketing and product should probably joint own because marketing owns a lot of the funnel, getting them into the product, a frictionless experience. Even when they're in the product, I would argue marketing can focus on the visual identity in the product, maybe the color scheme, delightful moments, reducing friction, going from 11 steps to get, time to value to 3 steps. There's a lot of things marketing can do there. So those are, at a high level, those are my 5, funnel metrics, experience metrics, stakeholder surveys, date-driven, POG metrics. Are these the only ones? No. I mean, there's tons of smart people. There's great other metrics out there, but I would just, it's a way to just kind of have you think like, hey, maybe it's not just leads, right? Maybe there are some other things we can do as a marketing team to show our broader impact on the company.
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear that latter part about the product things as well. I think it's easy sometimes to just think about your own little world. Like I'll just do the projects that I've set off to do. But again, you think very holistic about the experience that like if something's in the product and a customer can look at it, it's actually something that marketing should care about as well. If it's it's the wrong color or
think about how many times we've all gone to a website, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, this looks amazing. I see all these people, smiling faces. I see emotion. I understand it's written really well. This is a good website. And, and then you go in like, okay, free trial. I'm going in the product. And all of a sudden it's totally different. It's this bland, sterile, confusing piece of software that's hard to use. And you're like, what just happened, right? Like all the prompts were written by engineers. Everything is like next, cancel, request denied. There's nothing fun in here. I remember that's so funny story. I was advising a very, very large company and I was sending in my invoice, and you would think sending an invoice should take like 2 minutes of your time. This is not a hard thing, but I had to log into their procurement software. It took me like 2 hours, Stefan. I kid you not. It was like everything was an 8-point font. It was completely not written for the user or certainly a person submitting an invoice. Yeah. Maybe they were making that intentionally hard. And I was like pulling my hair out. I would never, ever, ever, ever use that software again. If I was buying the software, I would stay away from it. If people asked me about it, I'd say, my God, stay away from that. It's horrible, right? But marketing could have, like if they were included in those cycles, like, hey, because marketing tends to be good at like conversion rate optimization, right? Like how do we make things simpler? How do we reduce steps? They tend to be good at like brand stuff. So how do we make this more fun? How do we, include our color palettes? How do we include more Easter eggs? Maybe our mascots in the software. Maybe you get like a high five when you finish your first key task or some fireworks go off. There's just lots of opportunities there. And historically, marketing doesn't do it because those teams are very siloed and they use, most importantly, very different metrics.
I feel like I'm thinking about our own product, how we could do that. I think it's interesting to say things needs to be a little bit more funny, like brighten up the day a little bit rather than just like being very concise. But Bill, so now you've painted this picture, all these metrics that you can care about, and I almost get a little bit stressed that I actually need to care about all these things. So what's your advice for marketers to kind of stay grounded or like don't get too stressed about all these moving parts that they could care about?
Yeah, so I think a lot of that comes down to the leader too, especially if you're a leader of a team, I would say, talk about comms. I'd say one of your next most important things is prioritization, right?
Yeah.
Like get the team focused. Like I think a lot of people just kind of say, okay, all these different marketing teams, what are you going to do this year, right? And I'm more of a believer of you go, hey, here are the 3 most important things we're going to do this year, or the 5 most important, whatever it is. They're literally in stack ranked order. And how do all of our marketing teams and even other teams outside marketing, how are we going to contribute to hit those?
Yeah.
And here's the metrics they're going to use, right? So we're using OKRs, Salesforce, we use V2MOM, which I think is a little bit better.
What's it called?
But V2MOM. So literally the word V, the number 2, and then MOM. You can look it up. It's a really cool framework. It includes, values, your mission. It includes the concept of stack ranking, which I think is really important. But yeah, I think, the worst bosses I've worked at is where they give you, 10 unstructured items that are all equally important, right? Like and you get stressed, right? And even with those metrics, you don't have to use all 5 of those. Maybe you just choose like 2 this year or 3 this year, or maybe for this quarter, brand is the most important. And we're going to focus on it, but we're going to measure it, right? So I do think like that's the job of the leader, the company leader, the marketing leader, even if you're the team leader, maybe you're the marketing ops team leader, right? Be really crucial with those cycles, because you can always do a million things, but what are the 3 that are really going to move the needle, and have your team laser focused on those to not get stressed out?
I think that's really good. Like the moments where I get stressed is when I have too many priorities that all seem important and they're not stacked according to their importance. then it stresses you out, because like what should I do, and you can't finish all of them at the same time.
Absolutely.
I'll do one last question, Bill, and then we'll round off. But so you probably have had this question before, but what's your advice to kind of have a successful career in marketing? Just like broadly speaking, what comes to your mind there?
Yeah, it's a fun question. So one, I mentioned it earlier, like, hey, focus on if you're employable, not employed. I remember when SEO came out, I'm a little older, but there weren't any there were no classes at school I could take on this. It was just like SEO. And I remember just going, hey, every night after work, I'm just going to spend like 2 or 3 hours reading forums, reading every single thing I can about SEO until like I'm an expert, right? I know about, backlinks, domain authority. I know about content creation, on-page optimization, video optimization, and the knowledge was out there. It's not like it's hidden. You guys do something I love, which is, multi-touch attribution modeling. I think that's so important. It is absolutely important. And it is a little bit harder when you first get into it. But if you read and you listen, and everybody even listening to this, I think is showing that, hey, they want to learn. They want to keep finding new ideas, and there's different ones out there. So I think just having that constant source of learning is incredible. And then, show that impact, right? Like, if you don't show the impact via metrics, you kind of devolve into having to show the impact via politics, which I don't know, like, I love being political. It's not fun, right? But if you have strong data that's like, hey, we are moving the needle here, right? And you're showing these teams the value, like that's going to help with your career, right? You're going to go further because your marketing is no longer limited to a very narrow slice. They're making this impact on a very large scale, right? And you're communicating, right? You're prioritizing, you're doing a lot of these things that great leaders do. So anyway, I think for me, that helps. And then maybe the last one is just like we talked about earlier too, find places that have pain. If you find a big pain source that a lot of other people have, that company is generally going to be doing pretty good, right? Because it's a big pain source, right? So, there's a lot of different ways VCs look at companies and look at all these different metrics and advanced metrics, and they're probably fine. But a simple one is just, hey, is this really painful? Have you experienced it as an actual person?
Yeah.
Is it a consumer or
is it
a
background
from
business as well?
Yeah, totally. So I think all those things will help you out.
Really good advice, Bill. And so last component. So if people want to follow you or get in contact with you, maybe want your advice, what is kind of the best route for them to take?
Yeah, I just kicked off a new social handle. So it's SAS CMO Pro. You can follow me there on all the major, Twitter, TikTok, all different ones. LinkedIn, obviously you're on LinkedIn, fantastic place.
Yeah.
You can follow me here. If you want to connect with me, send me a message. Happy to, see if I can help out. But, it's a lot of fun. And I'm shifting a lot more to talking about this stuff now, just because I think it was a lot of pain for me going through my marketing career, having to learn about this stuff and metrics and communications. And I found just talking about it allows me to, connect with other marketers that are going through similar pain points within their careers.
Wonderful. Bill, thank you so much for joining. I could ask you 20 more questions, but I'll let you go now. Thank you so much, Bill. We really appreciate it. And to you who are listening as well, thank you, Bill.
Thanks, guys.
We hope you like listening to us. Subscribe to our podcast and the ones that we have been guests on.
And if you have any feedback for us, just do let us know. And should there be a guest that you think we should be talking to, then pitch us.
We're looking forward to seeing you.